morning. Today marks 35 years since the Chernobyl nuclear disaster.
That explosion sent clouds of radiation all over Europe, forced tens of thousands of people to evacuate.
What if a single, forgotten photo could change everything we thought we knew about Chernobyl? One roll of film that was hidden for 40 years has been found. It is clear, bright, and difficult to use. Experts are shocked, survivors are scared, and it feels like history has been changed. This isn't just another story about the accident. It's a trip into a moment that has been frozen in time. Stay with us, because what we discovered when we zoomed in will leave you speechless. The forgotten roll of film. The box was hidden in a forgotten storage room on the outskirts of Kyiv. It was small enough to fit under an arm.
There has been a nuclear accident in the Soviet Union, and the Soviets have admitted that it happened. The Soviet version is this. One of the atomic reactors at the Chernobyl atomic power plant near the city of Kyiv was damaged.
It smelled like wet concrete and old paper that hadn't been touched in decades. That was back when Chernobyl was just another Soviet power plant. No one had opened this place since then. There were normal things in the box, like a broken wristwatch, a faded worker's badge, and a stack of maintenance notes written in Russian.
But first, that explosion at a nuclear plant in the Soviet Union. What caused it, and how many people did it hurt? Scanty information has come so far from the Soviets.
These are the kinds of things that people leave behind when they leave the house and never come back. But there was something else under all the mess, wrapped in thin brown paper. A small metal tin that felt cool to the touch and had one word written on the side in shaky block caps. April 1986. Not allowed. The restoration team thought it might be just another stack of old plans or maintenance logs. There wasn't much weight to the box, but it felt like something important had been waiting to be found. They slowly opened it, being careful not to damage what had been inside for almost 40 years. It came out with a roll of film that was still tight and whole, holding on to what it had seen that night when everything changed. After hours, the negatives were developed in a lab with white walls and tools that were always going. After that, everything stopped. A picture was floating in the wash that no one else in the room had seen before. It was just one frame that looked like it was taken yesterday, not decades ago. When the explosion happened, reactor number 4 was stuck in the first few minutes of chaos. The fire in the sky, the smoke rising like a shadow, and the graphite blocks on the ground burning like embers made it look like the disaster had been caught on film by a modern camera. The color was too bright, the light was sharp, and the details were too clear. It felt wrong, like using a glass that shouldn't be there to look at history. There were none of the scratches or blurs that are common on Soviet-era film. There is no grain that makes memories less clear. Colors were not dead, they came to life. There were red-orange fire arcs, silver-blue metal gleams, and pale white dust that covered everything like snow. Film from the mid-1980s was used, even though it looked like a picture taken with a digital camera. That's it. Don't play tricks, just the raw, impossible truth. Right away, the experts got to work scanning the prints, looking for fakes, and testing the film's chemical makeup. All of the tests agreed on one thing. This was real. The items were from the exact time of the meltdown. Plant experts used the same codes that were written on the things. There was nothing fake about the film itself. But nothing made sense when they looked at the picture itself and looked at the saturation, depth, and dynamic range. In 1986, cameras couldn't take pictures with this much color. In almost total darkness, they couldn't see the fire that well. They also couldn't have been so accurate about stopping an explosion. The mystery got clearer as I looked more closely. It looked like the edges of the frame were warped by the heat shimmer in the air, as if the film had been burned and frozen at the same time. The power plant's lines were so straight that you could see every crack in the reactor's surface, every broken panel on the roof, and every flicker of matter in the air. The picture shouldn't have existed, but it did. It was impossible to deny, impossible to understand, and terrifying. People who had been studying the disaster for decades leaned in closer and saw features they had never seen before, like the clear arc of the vent stack, the still glowy twisted beams, and the ash floating like snow. It was more than just a record of the blast. It wasn't that. Something that saw more than it should have. Something that had lived through time, radiation, and decay to bring this picture to us now. But it wasn't the finding itself that was the scariest part. It was what the experts saw when they got really close. Little things like shapes, colors, and movements started to show up that no one had ever written down before. The experts went pale, kept quiet, and struggled to find answers when they saw what they saw. This wasn't just a picture anymore. It was proof of something much stranger, and it was just the start. The impossible details. The first scan was clear enough to scare anyone, but the details became hard to understand when the picture was digitized and enlarged. It was like walking into that exact night in April 1986, because every part of reactor number 4's shell was frozen so sharply. The roof was broken, and its sharp edges cut through the frame like glass. The twisted steel beams were jumbled around the reactor. They were dimly lit by the emergency lights, but their colors were still clear, as if no time had passed. This black and white picture looked strange compared to the usual ones taken by Igor Kostin or Anatoly Raskazov, which were fuzzy, grainy, and twisted by radiation. Everything looked so clear that the human eye couldn't even handle it. It was like the camera was decades ahead of its time. A second shock came out as the team got near. Men in uniform were standing around the outside of the plant. Their shapes stood out against the rubble, but none of them were wearing protective suits. Not even the simple lead aprons that were given to firemen that night. Their jackets and helmets didn't have any markings that could be seen that would have connected them to the known teams sent out in the first few hours of chaos. They seemed to have shown up, done their job, and then vanished without leaving a name, a note, or even a picture. Until now. The story that the forensic scans told was just as scary. Chemical testing of the pigments showed levels of color saturation that are more like current digital imaging than the limited range of Soviet film stock. There were no hand tinting lines, changes made later, or anything fake. It looked like the film had taken in something more advanced than what was available in 1986, because every frame of that picture had been burned into the negative in real time. The negative's surface had microscopic pitting, which was quickly identified by experts as radiation burns. These are the kind of scars that happen when something is exposed to lethal amounts of gamma rays. It meant that the person carrying the camera and the film was close enough to the reactor to be in the kill zone. But somehow, the film and the camera both made it through when almost everything else did not. People who survived the event later said that seeing the digital copy was like going back to the worst night of their lives. They remembered how quickly the cameras they were carrying broke. The radiation destroyed the electronics and melted the film, leaving behind twisted frames that could not be used. That night, only a few fuzzy photos got away, and most of them were damaged beyond repair. But this picture, this one frame, had been around for 40 years and was still in perfect shape, as if time and rot had been told to leave it alone. Then the part that no one wanted to talk about came up. A figure stood in the lower right corner of the screen. It was hard to see until the resolution was pushed to its limits. Big, wide shoulders, with all of their fireman gear on. Everything about his jacket, every strap, buckle, and fold was very clear. but his face was fuzzy. It wasn't because of motion or distorted light. It looked like the film itself wouldn't show it. Cross-referencing started right away. Everyone who was on duty that night was checked by name. Roll calls for the plant guard were taken away. The known survivors and dead were looked at. The man wasn't on any list. His outfit didn't have any badges that went with it. There was no picture in the files that looked like him. It looked like someone had been there that night, standing outside the reactor farther than anyone else. And then they were erased from history. Even the most skilled experts were shocked by the picture. There were more questions than answers. How is it that a picture from 1986 shows colors and features that shouldn't be there? What were those men in dress doing without suits when the radiation would have killed them right away? Who or what was the blurry figure in the shot that stood still where no one should have been? But the more they looked, the stranger it got because the picture wasn't done showing them what it was. When they did a spectrum analysis on the film, a new, strange thing showed up. Something that was hiding in plain sight. This detail would take the investigation into areas that no one was ready to go into, and it would change the story of that night forever. Pripyat in living color. The second frame didn't feel like the first one at all. Not a single spark, puff, or twist of steel. It was just a city, living and whole, caught in a normal moment. Pripyat in full color, before everything went wrong. For a moment, it looked less like history and more like a picture from someone's family book because the frame was so wide. It was almost like a movie frame. The Ferris wheel stood tall above the amusement park. In the late afternoon sun, the bright yellow spokes of the wheels sparkled. Kids with red jackets and striped hats ran back and forth between the swings and the game booths, casting long shadows on the ground. If you looked at the picture long enough, you could almost hear them laughing. A boy holding a balloon stopped in the middle of a step, his smile bright and sharp. Not far away, moms walked along paths lined with trees, their strollers rolling slowly over the sidewalks. Some stopped to wave at neighbors, while others fixed a baby's hat against the wind. In the distance, the Palace of Culture sparkled, and the neon sign above the door was still on. It was a lighthouse for a community that didn't think their lives were about to fall apart. Around it, there was a busy square with teens in denim jackets leaning against bikes, groups of friends talking, and kids skipping rope. It was all framed in impossible detail. They just stood there and looked at the scan. There is no other picture like this, not in black and white, not in faded sepia, and not in any of the many photos that have been made to tell Pripyat's story. That was it. It was the only known full-color picture of the city as it had been, between the usual day's noise and the quiet that would come next. It was almost painful to look at every detail because it was so sharp and real. Everything would be different hours after this picture was taken. The sirens would go off. The orders would come down. People would be told to stay cool and only bring what they needed for a short evacuation over loudspeakers. They would be told they would be back in a few days. As the buses pulled into the city, they lined up along streets that were still full of bikes and toys. Parents pushed their kids quickly towards the yellow doors while holding their hands tightly. They had no idea that the kids would never return home again. What happened to the survivors when they saw the picture was terrible. They talked about that day not as if it had happened, but as if it were a memory that was still sharp. People left their flats, with curtains flapping in the open windows, and locked the doors, thinking they'd unlock them in the morning. They left their pets waiting by the gates, not realizing that the morning would never come. As one woman traced the print's edges, she said in a whisper that the Ferris wheel had never been used. It was built for a May Day party that never happened. The picture was called a time capsule by experts who looked at it. It seemed to hold the atmosphere of Pripyat itself, like the warmth of the sun on concrete, the restless hum of a community at its peak, and the innocence of people who didn't know what was coming. This wasn't the empty, dead town that tourists see now, with trees growing through the pavement and moss growing up the walls that have been left empty. This city was bright and busy, but it would be dead quiet in just a few hours. Still, that frame had something more going on. The impossible accuracy, the perfect sharpness, and the feeling that the camera didn't just take a picture, but also kept life in it. Analysts leaned in close and looked at every part of the picture, trying to figure out how a film that had been stored for 40 years could still be so clear. But as they got closer, they saw something else. A pattern hidden in the colors, and an odd shape at the frame's edge that shouldn't have been there. The liquidators. There was something different about the third picture. Not the confusion of the reactor going off, not the peace of Pripyat hours before the sirens went off. It was pretty quiet, almost still, but this one felt busier than the others. At first view, it looked like the outside of the plant. The burned concrete was still steaming under the floodlights, and radioactive dust was thick in the air. Then the scan got more detailed, cutting through the fog, and that's when they saw them. In the far left area of the picture, two people stood, but they were hard to see because of the shadows. Their bodies were stiff, and heavy masks covered their faces. But what everyone else noticed was their gear. They weren't wearing the usual Soviet protective suits that can be seen in every old picture from that night. Instead, they wore crude lead aprons over their worn-out outfits. Their helmets were dented, and their badges were blank. No names, not a number. There was no information about who they were or where they came from. Radiation experts looked at the suits and tried to figure out where to put them. The design looked like it had been used before, like early prototypes for teaching people to take care of nuclear reactors, but with some strange changes. Others had already thought this, and one expert confirmed it. This gear wasn't in any government records. There is no record in the Soviet files of this kind of equipment being used on April 26, 1986. Still, there they were, frozen in the frame, nearer to the center than anyone should have been able to stay alive. The truth became more disturbing as the investigation went on. They were sent by the Soviet Union to clean up after the war. They were called liquidators, and most of them had no idea what they were getting into. Soldiers, miners, firefighters, and engineers were thrown into a nightmare with only tools, dosimeters, and very little safety gear. They rushed to the top of the reactor in shifts as short as 90 seconds to push radioactive waste into the hole below. There was so much radiation that not even the best suits could protect you. Many of them fell apart within days. A lot of them never left. It's hard to forget the stories of those who lived long enough to tell them. Some said they didn't know about the danger because they thought they were helping their country by fixing what they saw as another workplace accident. Some people talked about the silence and how they were told not to ask questions or talk about what they saw. They were given medals and sometimes a month's pay by the government. When they got sick and couldn't work, their names were taken off formal records. Years and years of secrets hidden beneath the surface. That quiet was broken by this picture, though. Those two men in the corner, with their faces covered and their gear not marked, shouldn't be part of history. In the first 72 hours, the normal rosters of the liquidator teams didn't match. It wasn't clear who they were or why they were standing at the edge of the reactor when the radiation levels were high enough to kill in minutes. There were no mission logs or unit assignments. There was a lot of talk. Some said they were part of a small, unofficial task group that was sent out before the government even knew what had happened as an early response unit. Others wondered if they were trying experimental safety gear, that is, gear that was meant to collect data and was quietly taken away when the experiment failed. The researchers also talked about a darker idea as they looked at the high-resolution scans. They thought the men had been sent there without expecting to live, like ghost workers doing a job that was too dangerous to name. The more they looked, the more questions came up. The lines on the aprons were very faint and stitched in a way that no one could figure out, in contrast to the lighter rubber boots that most workers were given. Theirs were heavier and stronger. And the fact that they were stopped in mid-movement, as if they were about to take a step forward, made things even stranger. It looked like the picture showed something that no one else was supposed to see. A secret truth that had been buried for decades in silence and denial. Then they became aware of something that made everyone in the room cold. What else in the other frames would show a story about that night that no one had ever been told, if those men weren't meant to be there? When they found what they did next, it was even stranger. It went against all logic and changed the story of Chernobyl, piece by piece. When science can't explain it. The picture became weirder as the scans went deeper. The film showed secrets that couldn't be seen with the naked eye when it was enlarged. At first, the picture seemed too clear to be real, but now it told a story written in science. The colors weren't on top like they are on most colored film. They were fused deep inside the emulsion, making it look like they were baked into the frame as soon as the shutter clicked. There was a depth of color in every layer of the picture that no camera in 1986 should have been able to make. Radiation experts did their own tests by taking microscopic samples from the edge of the picture. What they found made the puzzle even bigger. There were trace isotopes in the layers of emulsion. These were the kind that were made by direct gamma contact, not from contamination from storage. This meant that the film had been at the scene during the worst of the meltdown, close enough to have absorbed enough radiation to have killed it right away. Still, the picture was perfect. It hadn't warped, burned, or broken down even after being locked away for 40 years. Ideas spread quickly, and each one is scarier than the last. Some scientists thought that the picture might have been made using an experimental imaging method that was tried in secret at the plant, and then forgotten after the explosion. Others mentioned the KGB and hinted at secret surveillance systems that were used to keep an eye on high-risk areas. These systems used cutting-edge technology that could record every detail with more accuracy than consumer cams of the time. But when looked at more closely, even those ideas fell apart. The sharp lines of the debris, the bright colors of the machines and people, and the clarity of the fires were all things that analog film couldn't do. When cameras were exposed to that much radiation, their circuits should have fried, and their lenses should have twisted from the heat. But this camera didn't break, and the film was fine, holding a picture that looked like it was taken yesterday. It all started to hit him like a rock. People who lived through Chernobyl saw the picture and thought it was more than just a technical oddity. These included the firemen who fought the fire, the liquidators who shoveled radioactive graphite with their bare hands, and the families who had to leave everything behind. It gave them a clear view of a night they never thought they'd see again. When the survivors looked at the picture, they remembered things they had never said out loud. The strange quiet in the air, the creepy glow rising above the plant, and the figures moving in and out of shadows as chaos broke out. Experts who had been studying the disaster for decades started to wonder what else had been kept secret the whole time. What other records were kept secret? What other facts had been buried under a lot of smoke and mirrors? The picture didn't just question the science behind how it was taken, it also called into question everything they knew about the accident. Then they found something that stopped the room in its tracks. a very small mark showed up in the bottom corner of the negative during high-spectrum analysis. It was so weak that it was hard to see. A note written by hand and scratched into the film. The team looked at it for hours, getting closer and closer, but the message wouldn't come out. The mark was small and sharp, like a quiet warning that the picture wasn't done talking. They were already scared by the film's colors, clarity, and the fact that it could not have survived. But this sign turned the mystery into something much stranger. What this photo means. The picture was never just a picture. When the first scans showed up on the screen, it grew into something bigger that no one saw coming. Historians saw it as a unique key to a locked moment in time, proof of seconds that had only ever been talked about in vague reports and jumbled memories. Reactor number 4 was on fire in the middle of the night, and Pripyat was shining with a peaceful innocence. In the haze before the chaos, people could be seen moving. This one frame proved what had been said about it, showing what no other lens had ever been able to catch. It had a weight that words could never describe for those who lived through it. They didn't see technology, colors that couldn't exist, or emulsions that had been burned by radiation. They went home. The windows of their apartments reflected the soft light of a spring evening, and they saw streets they had walked 1,000 times. These were the familiar signs and symbols of a life that ended with one statement. They saw kids go to bed and never come back, pets wait by doors that never opened, and schools stopped teaching in the middle of a lesson. It hurt to look at the picture because it reminded me of a wound that never healed. Some people couldn't stand to look twice. A lot of people stared for hours, tracing faces they thought they had forgotten, as if the clear picture could bring back the words that had been silenced. Scientists, on the other hand, saw it as a challenge to everything they thought they knew. The picture showed technology that shouldn't have existed because it was too advanced for the tools that were available in 1986. They could map the radiation in the film, break down the layers of emulsion, and model the impossible sharpness. But none of it helped them figure out how the picture had been taken or how it had survived. They had to face an uncomfortable truth. Chernobyl's story may still have secrets hidden in records that were never seen by the public, and tests that were erased before anyone could question them. People who study history talked about the photograph's meaning and how it caught the half-second before the world turned upside down. In the soft light of evening, Pripyat didn't know that time was running out. Families stuck between routine and disaster, stuck in the calm before the storm for all time. It wasn't just a picture. It was a mirror that showed how fragile a normal day was right before it was lost. Then there was a fight over what should happen next. Some said it should be kept in a vault and studied in secret to keep its purity and mystery. Others thought it should be shown to everyone as a warning of what happened, what was lost, and what is still there in the shadow of reactor number 4. Each choice was important. Every choice felt like holding history in shaky hands, afraid to drop it, and afraid of what the truth might say. But the picture had already changed everything, no matter what would happen. It made people who grew up seeing pictures of the accident in black and white see April 1986 in vivid, unmistakable color. It brought the disaster out of books and news stories and into sharp, painful reality. It made everyone remember that Chernobyl was more than just a reactor, a number, or a disaster. In just one day, people's lives were upended, families were split up, and the city was silent. History is still being rewritten, and this is just the beginning. Like, share, and subscribe for more untold mysteries. And click the next video on your screen. You won't believe what's waiting there.